Welcome to the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. I'm thrilled you're here. My name is Jason Elkins, and in addition to being your host, I'm also a former U.S. Army paratrooper, third-generation commercial hot air balloon pilot, paramotor pilot, ex-Montana fly fishing guide, advanced open water scuba diver, and a full-time nomad that's visited more than 30 countries on 6 continents. As a seasoned adventure travel expert with a passion for creating and sharing meaningful experiences, I'm on a quest to impact the lives of adventure travelers, tour operators they rely on, and the communities that host them. Every week, I bring you exclusive interviews with fascinating adventure tourism experts who have agreed to share their personal stories, favorite destinations, and some invaluable travel insights they've picked up along the way. We'll enjoy a casual conversation, create some connections, and likely share some laughs. It's my hope that by the end of each episode, this big world will feel just a bit smaller. Let's get started, shall we? Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. Happy to have each and every one of you back here today, and super excited to have my guest with me today. We've got Purvi Shah here with us. She is the head of sustainability and the senior travel planner for Kampur Travel Diaries. Purvi, nice to have you on the show. Happy to see you again.
Hi, Jason. Thanks for having me on. I really love the concept of this big world made small, and I think that big world is only made small by more conversations and connections. So I'm looking forward to this.
Love that you see it that way, because that was definitely my intention. So to bring people together, and it's been a lot of fun. We're coming up on 2 years of the show now. Had a lot of amazing conversations with people from around the world, and super excited to do the same with you. I mean, you and I have spoke once. We had a short conversation, but I was fascinated with what you're doing. Thought, well, we need to come back and record it so other people can hear it. And it'll be much more in depth this time, because as I mentioned to you on our first calls, this is behind the scenes for anybody that's listening. We usually do a first kind of introduction call, but I always tell my guests, I said, don't tell me anything now. I'm not going to ask you. I already know you're interesting. Don't tell me too much, because I don't want to know the answers to the questions. So we're gonna learn a lot today. I'm going to learn a lot today. So Purvi, before we jump in, where are you physically located right now?
So I'm in Nairobi in Kenya in East Africa. That's where is home, and that's where we live, and that's where I've grown up.
Very, very cool. We're going to dig into that pretty big time, deep, whatever you want to call it. We're going to hear your whole life story, maybe not every detail. But before we do that, I think our listeners may be interested. You know, I mentioned the name of the company, Kampur Travel Diaries. And let's give them kind of the 60-second elevator pitch. We don't need the whole company history, because we'll probably get into that. But what does Kampur Travel Diaries do?
We're a boutique owner-managed company based in Nairobi, and we organize customized bespoke safaris and trips for our guests, and we offer trips in 11 countries around Africa and the Middle East, and we only do Africa and only Jordan in the Middle East. And basically all our trips are led by local guides. And secondly, when you travel with us, part of the proceeds of the trip go towards our programs that we have in a number of areas, including education, conservation, reforestation, women empowerment, and working with other conservation organizations to help fund some of their programs.
That's wonderful. And that's one of the things that attracted my attention towards you, actually, was because I did a little research early on, and I saw that you were really doing things. It wasn't just we give, just a flat, we give X percent of our profits to one organization. We just transfer the money. You're much more involved and much deeper than that. And I really thought that was pretty cool. So we're going to get into that. So let's do this. We're going to go back to the beginning, or back close to the beginning for you as a person. And then we're going to work our way back up to kind of where you are now. Tell me, your accent to me doesn't sound East African. It definitely doesn't sound like my accent. So where did this all start for you?
So I'm like a third or fourth generation Kenyan. I say third or fourth because On my dad's side, I mean, Kenya was a British colony, India was a British colony. So there was a lot of mass migration from India to Kenya, especially initially when they started building the railway in Kenya. And this is in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So on my dad's side, my grandfather moved from India to Kenya, not to build the railway, but at the time my ancestors are from a part of India called Gujarat. And at that time, there was quite a bad drought in Gujarat, and, the living conditions were very tough. So a lot of families were sending their young boys to Kenya or to East Africa to try and start making a life for themselves there. So there was a lot of people who came in these little ships and dhows. So on my dad's side, my grandfather moved, and on my mom's side, her grandfather moved. So my great grandfather moved from India to Kenya, and that's how our families over the years got established there. So if anyone asks me, like, my accent is probably a mixture of British, American, Indian, Kenyan, everything. It's quite a unique accent. It's quite interesting you asked about that, Jason, because when I go to the UK, people say I sound American. When I'm in the US, people say I sound British, and I'm like, actually, I think I just have my own unique accent. And I think it's also being picked up from the teachers we had at school, probably from our parents' accents. It's kind of a unique mishmash. That's the best way I can
Okay.
describe it.
So be honest with me. I'm a big boy. I've got a thick skin. When I say you were clearly born in East Africa, is that correct? Is that a correct statement?
Yes. Yep. Yes.
So you're East African. So when someone like me says, "Oh, you don't sound East African," what goes on internally? And again, like I said, be honest.
So the funny thing is, this is something that we've lived with all the time, because as much as the world is global, we are still set in our ways of people we expect to be from certain parts of the world. You see a brown face, you immediately think India, Asia, Sri Lanka. You see a white face, you think the Western world. But that's not how it works anymore, right? There's been mass migration throughout the world. And it's just funny that, to me, I guess it's just funny that we still have these stereotypes that exist as much as the world is now global. People have.
Yeah, I agree, and I hear it completely. And I'm one of those people that is traveling constantly. I've been around enough to know that how you look or sound doesn't really tell the whole story. I've actually have some embarrassing situations where, in Latin America, for example, I've walked up to people that look like me and just assume, like, "Oh, hey, where are you from?" "I'm from Arizona." And I'd expect them to say, "Oh, I'm from Ohio. I'm from California." And they're like, "I'm from Quito," in Spanish.
Yes.
Or, and I'm like, "Oh, okay. I guess I got that one wrong." And it took a while to kind of figure that out. But I also, on the podcast, use it as a little bit of a conversation starter, because obviously you and I probably did not grow up in the same place with the same teachers and the same parents and all that stuff. So it just sounds different. So, all right. Yes. So were you born in Nairobi then, or where at in Kenya?
Yeah. So, I mean, like, in terms of, technically, yes, I was born in Nairobi, but my family lived in a smaller town on the foothills of Mount Kenya. It's a town called Nyeri. Honestly, I think being brought up there, and also I think my parents, as much as they probably don't think they're explorers, do love traveling. And we lived in a place where every day from the window I would see Mount Kenya. And part of our growing up, we had a national park not far from where we lived called the Aberdares. And part of our growing up, most of my memories are going to the Aberdares. Like, my dad would come home from work, and then we would drive there for 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock tea, and watch the elephants at this lodge there, at the waterhole. And as a child, you think that's normal. I did not realize it's not a normal thing for most people in the world. I honestly only realized that going on safari is not a normal thing for most people when I was working in the UK. And so I'm saying this is in, like, my ease, that I found out and understood, because I had I had a colleague who was going to Kenya on safari at that time. And that's when I started hearing phrases like, yeah, this is a trip of a lifetime. We have saved for so many years to go on this trip. And I was like thinking, oh, I used to do this this is like normal for us. That's when you started seeing actually there's a different perspective and you start understanding the privilege that you were brought up with to be able to experience all this.
Do you think that that experience has helped you become a better, I guess, a better operator for your clients? Because because here's the thing. If you fully appreciate that this is a new experience for them, something that they've saved a long time for, something they're super excited about, then you can maybe approach the whole thing a little differently than if you've never left Kenya and you grew up around all these things. So you just kind of take it for granted to a certain extent. And somebody shows up and says, oh my gosh, we got to go see the elephants. And if you just say, why? They'll be there tomorrow. We can take our time. Let's go look at this first and look at that first. I suspect it's played a huge role in what you do.
So, Jason, interestingly enough, I think both parts have played a huge role. One, knowing the privilege that I grew up with. But secondly, as part of that privilege, I never stopped being in awe of the wildlife. So we have done over hundreds of safaris, it's just, and yet every time I'm like a little child again.
Okay.
The one thing I do dream of and wish of is it's the only one thing I'll never be able to experience again, that first joy of someone seeing, even if it's their first impala or their first gazelle, but it's just a really wow moment. So that is one thing I'm like, oh wow, I'll never have that again. But then I realized that my joy of being in the wild and of seeing the wildlife is just inherent. And as much as I've always seen it, I also know that for someone to see it and experience it for the first time, it's something very difficult to put into words. Like even when we're talking to guests, even when we're explaining to them, in the background, I know I can give them all the information, but that feeling that they're going to have of just utter amazement is something that until they get there, I can't describe, however hard I try. And what has helped is so knowing that and knowing that it's their first time, yes, because it helps us actually. Because the problem, one of the big problems, it's a good thing and it makes it difficult, is information overload from the internet. People read a lot of things, but then they read even then, I found that with Kenya, things that we are so aware of, not only in Kenya, but East Africa, Southern Africa, the amount of information which is available online does not give you the full picture, even in this information age. And people come in to us, when they speak to us, they have these set ideas of what they want to do. But then when we start speaking to them and start understanding what their interests are, what they want to experience, suddenly the whole itinerary changes because of our experience. And because we know that them coming as a first time, this is what will work best for them.
Right.
You know, it's putting that together.
I've heard quite a few times people in my life have just used the expression, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know. You might think you know, but that's because you don't know. You don't know what you don't know. And I think that that's especially so when you're dealing with something so, I want to say foreign, but just so different. I mean, Africa is just so much different than North America or anywhere really. And I remember the first time I was in Africa and had the safari experience, I was there having it, and I don't know how I would have described it in that moment. It's just, you can't really, the word is surreal, and you're like, you can kind of reference back to maybe, you watched, I don't know, safari documentaries in the past or whatever, and you might kind of like, oh, okay, I see the similarities, but not really. It's just like, my gosh, I'm sitting here having a sundowner looking out over the savannah with there's elephants over there, there's zebras over there, there's warthogs here, there's,
Yes.
it's just like, holy cow, how is this even possible? And if you haven't experienced it, there's really no way to describe it, which is a challenge. All right. We're going to come back to helping your clients and how that all looks like and what you've learned over the years. But I also I want to dig a little deeper into your childhood, because obviously it sounds like it was quite impactful. Before we do that, I just have to ask, because I'm curious. You'd mentioned that, like, your grandfathers, when they came from India, something you specifically mentioned was that because of the drought, families sent away their young boys, or, well, maybe not young boys. We can define that.
Teenage boys.
Teenage boys. So I'm trying to envision the family. Okay, we need to send away our teenage boys. In a lot of cultures, I would almost come to the conclusion, we're going to send them away. They're going to go work and send all their money back, or they're going to go work for a year or two and then they're going to come back. What was it actually like? I mean, the stories you heard, what was it all? Was it really like, we're going to send them away, they're going to start a new life, and we may never see them again? Was that what it was like?
Jason, I believe so. Yes, unfortunately, and I'll be very honest, especially in our family, one, we don't have a lot of written down history. And secondly, is for me personally, both my grandfathers had passed away before I was born. So they're not people I had a chance to have conversations with to find out. I've had conversations with both my grandmothers, but what happened is my grandmothers were living in India. My grandfathers went back to India to get married and then brought them back.
Okay.
And I'll tell you something. I'll tell you some interesting stories about that. And I mean, at that time, in our culture, people used to get married early. So, like on my paternal side, my grandmother, like when I turned 12 or 13, she would laugh. She'd be like, now it's time for you to get married because I got married at this age. And, it was just our joke. And even on my mom's side, my grandmother got married at the age of 16. The very interesting thing at that time was moving to Kenya. Kenya was still a very wild place. It wasn't built up. It wasn't developed. Both my grandmothers have told me that when they came here, like on my dad's side, I think she actually went back to India for a few years before she came back to live with my grandfather because life was tough. And on my mom's side, my mom's mom came from a relatively well-to-do family in India. And when she moved here, she was moving from like a good house to kind of like a shack, is the best way to describe it. But it just shows the resilience. So I don't think at that stage the families actually expected their kids to necessarily go back to India. I don't know what the expectation was in terms of the whole situation, but I think that what came out of it is that so many people came from certain communities that there was a very strong community bond which formed in these new locations where these people moved to, which then allowed the community to thrive. And because it was kind of a do or die situation, people really, they looked out for each other, they helped each other out, and they started being able to build businesses, establish families, and actually make a life for themselves.
So is it your understanding, because based on the experience with your family, the way you understand it, is maybe the guys left, came back, maybe got married, and then took their wives back with them? Because that's what I was imagining when you said they send their young men off, is what do they do with their daughters? I envisioned the small community full of older people with a bunch of daughters, and all the young men are gone. It sounds like a lot of would come back and get married and then return to Kenya. Is that the plan?
Yep.
All right.
Yes.
That's cool. I knew I'd learn something.
Basically.
All right. That's very cool.
Yeah, I mean, there's different families. There's a lot of books which have been written about this whole migration, but I'm just talking from my personal experience about what I know from my family.
Okay. So growing up, you said you'd go with your dad to, was it Mount Kenya? You'd mentioned another name of a place that you guys would go.
So it's called the Aberdares National Park.
Aberdares.
It's the
Aberdares.
Aberdares are a mountain range, but there's a certain part of it which does have, which was just like good populations of elephants and stuff. And I think we used to go there because my dad used to love it. And I'm glad we went there because now I love it.
You kind of mentioned going out there kind of in the evenings and having tea and stuff. Would you go camping as well?
So we did do some camping trips, but not as much. But my first camping trips were also with my dad and my brothers and family, and we went to different places. But this, like going to the Aberdares, was kind of like it was either that evening visit or it was like we had guests come to Nyeri, we would take them. We used to go out and do a lot of picnics, as big family groups. So there'd be like 4 or 5 cars going and everyone would go on this picnic. So there was a lot of that. And it all happened as a group. So it was kind of like more of a family or friends and family.
I'm going to ask you some questions that are going to kind of show a little bit of ignorance about growing up in Africa. I grew up in the Western United States, and I remember that at one point my parents got divorced and I moved to the Eastern US. I was living in New York State, and people would ask me, where are you from? And I'm from Wyoming. Well, Wyoming is in the mountains. It's like most people that live in the United States don't know where Wyoming is. But if they do, they think of cowboys and Indians. So I'd get those questions, do you ride the horse to school, or to work? Do you, all kinds of those questions. Do you live in teepees? Do you live in houses? Whatever. But I also recognize that you don't know what you don't know. I've spent some time in Africa, but haven't really had a lot of opportunities to ask some of these questions. So I'm going to just ask you some questions that are kind of stereotypical that you can kind of help me resolve in my mind. So when I asked you if you went camping when you were young, I'm thinking, that's crazy. Who would go camping in Kenya where they have things like, I don't know, leopards and lions and all these animals? It's just hard for me to get my head around. Even though we had bears in Wyoming, I grew up camping outside. We had bears. We took precautions. But tell me what it's like to go camping as a teenager in Kenya at that time. What do you remember of that?
So our camping trips, we didn't do super wild camping. So we didn't go out, like I would say, into the Masai Mara or something like that. Like one of the camping trips was while we were climbing Mount Kenya. So you would set up tent at every place. And even Mount Kenya has wildlife. They have buffaloes, elephants. They have quite a lot of wildlife because it is a Jason, I think I didn't think about it, honestly, because you're like, okay, my dad is taking me, people do this, it's what's done. People climb the mountain, it's safe. And then you have rangers with you, you have wildlife rangers with you. And generally, even in places where there is wild camping or camping in the park, the animals don't attack the tents and stuff. It's not one of these things, even though I know you may have seen videos of it. Generally, I don't know, I've never felt unsafe. Let me put it that way. It's pretty, I think because you're in a structure, and generally, if we were to do camping like that, we would have armed rangers with us.
Okay. But that felt normal. That's just part of growing up. I mean, wherever we grow up tends to feel normal pretty quickly. But also part of why I wanted to bring it up is because I'm sure you have guests that come and go on safaris with you and don't like, oh my gosh, I don't want to get eaten. I don't want to, all these things. Or why do we have to have these rangers walking around with rifles over their shoulders? That type of thing can be a little intimidating for someone, especially if they grew up in, Manhattan, New York, or Los Angeles or something like that. So, okay, I was curious about that. Was really the only super naive question that I had at the moment. I'm sure I'll come up with some more. Do you have some siblings as well?
I do have 2 siblings. They're both living in the West. One's living in London and one's living in San Francisco. So, yeah.
Were they as enthusiastic about going with your dad and being outside in nature, or was this a whole family thing? It sounds like it, because you'd say usually it was a full group of maybe multiple families, right?
Yeah, all of us love being out in the wild. But like my eldest brother probably doesn't love camping and hiking, but being out in the wild is amazing. Like for us, just even seeing the wildlife and seeing the elephants. Like, I think we're a family who could just sit a whole day and watch elephants at a waterhole. And it's not just me and my family. I mean, like, my husband's like that as well. So it's a lot of us in Kenya. I think if you fall in love with nature and the wild, you just want to keep going back. And I think that's us. I think that's what it is.
I appreciate that you
We
said
miss it.
Yeah, I appreciate that you said it wasn't just our family, because the next question I was going to ask you, is that a typical Kenyan attitude about nature and the wild? And here's an example I'll use to kind of illustrate where I'm going with this is I lived in Belize for a while and managed a scuba diving and fly fishing resort on an island 30 miles off the coast of Belize in the Caribbean. And one of the things that shocked me the most when I got to Belize was, it's a Caribbean nation, Caribbean Ocean, but there were a large number of people that lived in Belize that had no desire to get on a boat.
Yes.
Not even no desire. Like, I am not getting on a boat. They had no desire to go snorkeling or swimming or scuba diving. It was just like, nope, I'm not a water person. And then there were a handful, probably a very small percentage, that would get on a small little canoe loaded with stuff to where the water was, a couple inches below the gunnels, and they would just paddle out across across out in the ocean, and they seem perfectly comfortable with it. So what's that like in Kenya? Do you have kind of the same mix?
Yes. So I'll tell you, our tourism, when you look at tourism in Kenya, it is for the middle class and above. Majority of the Kenyan local population will not have seen wildlife. They will not be going to the parks. Unfortunately, it is not an affordable thing for majority of Kenyans. They could be living near the parks. They could, it's like I'll explain to you, like for a Kenyan, like an average working person, maybe their travel will be to go back to their town or where the grandparents are living in the village or the town, that sort of thing. There's still a lot of that sort of family travel going back to where you came from. The people going to the parks, Jason, honestly, it's above a certain income level that can afford it. And even around, so I'll give you an example of like the Masai Mara, which is probably one of our most famous national parks. And even people living around the Mara, a lot of them, the only time they've seen wildlife is when their farms are being destroyed by the elephants, or the elephants have walked through the school. They haven't really gone in and seen the wildlife that way. And that happens all over Kenya. So, and this is one of the things, and this is why, even with what we do, one of the things that we looked at funding is through an organization called Mara Elephant Project, a conservation education program, which is targeting about 12 schools and increasing. And these are schools based in these areas where there is human-wildlife conflict. They're not actually in the actual park, but on the outskirts. Because the other thing to remember is that a lot of our wildlife is not just in the parks. They do go out. In fact, they say 70% of the wildlife is actually outside the parks.
Okay.
So the parks are just the ones which are governed either privately or by government or by county, things like that. And they have management plans in place and things. But our wildlife can roam freely. So this is where it's interesting because, and it's interesting you ask this because we've also had guests ask this, and I'm like, actually, the people who come to see the wildlife, it's more tourists, and quite often more tourists from overseas compared to the local Kenyans. Yes, Kenyans are going. There's a lot more Kenyans who travel, who are going to the parks, who are going to the beaches, who are climbing the mountains, because financially people's incomes have gone up. People are now traveling with their kids. They want to show their kids, which is absolutely amazing because I think this is our heritage and we people living here should be able to see it. But the reality on the ground is that for a lot of the population, maybe 80%, I would say, if not more, they can't afford it. I mean, just to go these wildlife spaces, like every park you go to has park fees. And yes, the Kenyans' park fees are subsidized compared to international park fees. But when you start looking at the cost of maybe taking a family of 5, it still adds up, and salaries are not that high. So,
If you're
yeah.
just trying to put food on the family table day after day after day, or maybe put your child through school or whatever, a park, a safari vacation is kind of outside the scope of possibility. I'm curious what you think, other than, so you've got a lot of Kenyans that aren't able to experience that. I get that. I get that part. Is it important for the overall conservation goals to ensure that Kenyans do have that connect? So I guess what I'm saying is, I'm going to play devil's advocate. This is not what I believe. I'm just going to ask the question this way. What does it matter if the kids in Nairobi ever see a lion or an elephant? Because it doesn't really matter, because if we charge a lot of money to tourists to come in and do it, we can take the money we earn from the tourists to hire rangers and do all this stuff to take care of the animals. It doesn't really matter if the kids in Nairobi see these animals. So is that true? Does that come up when there's political conversations, or is the flip side is we need to get the kids involved because they're the future. We got to get them involved. We got to get them to love the animals so that they will work hard to protect them in the future. Because that's kind of two different, I guess, perspectives.
I think it's the flip side, especially with human populations rising. People have to, one, by getting, and I'll say this from a personal experience. If growing up, I'd never seen the wildlife, I don't know if at this stage I would have that passion that I do right now. And having had, and even listening to a lot of our guides and how they got into guiding and things like that, it was from, seeing the safari land cruisers, or maybe from their school, they got taken on a field trip to the park, or they were living near the parks, and, they got a chance to go in and see this wildlife, and that actually ignited the passion in them. So how do you ignite a passion in someone if they don't know what it is about? So I think it's more the flip side. I get where the devil's advocate part comes from, but I think as a sustainable way, in a long-term conservation focus, in terms of us being able to still have wildlife in hundreds of years to come, especially with increasing human populations, it is important for the younger generation to see the wildlife, to understand why it's there, to understand why the balance is needed, and to start getting an appreciation for it. Otherwise, what is going to want them to protect it in the years to come? And, it's not enough just having a small group doing this. It needs to be something that's a national pride, that people are like, actually, this is like really what makes part of Kenya. But there's also another flip side, Jason, to this, that Kenya is not just about wildlife, and we need to see beyond that. And that, you see, traditional tourism has looked as Kenya as just, and I'll focus more on Kenya because that's just where we are at the moment, has focused just more on wildlife tourism. But there's so much more. We're so rich in different cultures. There's a lot. I mean, just even our landscapes, we have some amazing beaches, we grow tea, we grow coffee. There's so much more about Kenya that you can see compared to just the wildlife. And I think what's happening is now slowly the narration is changing. And as as more people, as the younger generations are getting into tourism, they're also changing that narrative. So it's not just about going to see the wildlife. So even like the younger local Kenyans, when they travel, it might not be to a park. They might be going to the beach, they'll go and explore one of the other towns. So there's a lot more to the tourism here than just safaris now.
There's a lot of places in the world where people go to engage with cultural stuff where they don't have elephants and lions. And I'm not suggesting that you not protect the elephants and the lions and the stuff like that. But I guess I'm curious, does the wildlife, just the presence of the wildlife kind of, in effect, overshadow everything else that's there? So that when people think of Kenya, they think of wildlife because the wildlife is kind of dramatic compared to the rest of the world?
So, yes, I do agree with that. People come for the wildlife. But can I tell you, the number of times, probably more than 90%, when we meet our guests at the end or when we get the feedback, they're like, yeah, we came to see the wildlife. We fell in love with the people.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And that for me,
I've heard that a few times. Yeah.
that for me is the biggest thing, because they don't, and it's fine if the wildlife is what is bringing them here, that's great. But this is where also when we craft our trips and our journeys, it becomes important in the way we craft them so that they're not just here for it's not just a checklist. It's not like, oh, seen a lion, seen an elephant. It becomes more meaningful. It becomes more intentional. Even the guides they are with, hearing their stories, learning about their lives, all of that just makes it into such a more meaningful experience that the guests go away, not just remembering the wildlife, but remembering a lot more. And the other thing, Jason, is Kenyans are just inherently super friendly and super welcoming people. And the level of hospitality, I've traveled around the world, and don't get me wrong, everywhere has great hospitality.
In its own way.
And maybe,
in its own way. Yeah.
maybe I'm biased. Maybe I'm biased because I live here. But there's something about Kenyan hospitality. There's a warmth. About it that is just, it stays with you. It stays with you for a long, long time.
I love that you brought this up because I've been fortunate to travel around quite a bit. I have not been to Kenya. I have been to some other locations in Africa and around the world. And every once in a while, I'll show up in a place that people just insist, oh, the people here are very hospitable. Like if you're a guest, then you're a gift from God and it's their duty to treat you as such and da-da-da-da-da. But I'm trying to be careful how I say this. But then it's followed up with, but they have to get to know you first. You know exactly what I mean. You're like, people here don't seem very friendly. Oh, no, they're very friendly. Well, they don't smile very much. Oh, well, once they get to know you, then they're friendly. I'm like, well, how are they going to get to know me if they're not smiling at me and I'm, Miss Smiley Face? And it's just hard to sometimes imagine how you're going to get to know them to the point where you get to see them being friendly. And then there's other places that, even probably throw some of the tourists off because people are so friendly. Hey, welcome. What do you think of my country? Come on inside. We're having this. We're going to eat that. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And I envision Kenya a little bit more like that. I've have some Kenyan friends that I've met over the years. They're like that. So it sounds like, and I don't know if there's a question there. I guess the question I really had though was, are Kenyans typically excited about opening up and welcoming people in, or is that something they have to kind of learn if they work in the tourism business?
I think it's the former. I think there's an inherent inbuilt hospitality from the start. I truly believe that when you are learning how to be hospitable, there's something that just doesn't flow.
It's
you can see it. I've seen it. Kenyans inherently have that within them. I just think because even growing up, it's always been about communities and welcoming people and having guests and all these things. So we're just welcoming.
Is that a challenge because you've been doing this long enough? You've met a lot of people from a lot of places. that have come over. And we don't need to discuss particular stereotypes. We started the conversation with that when we talked a little bit about accents and stuff. But I suspect you've seen some people that don't really know how to deal with that and may even be distrusting of it. So maybe they show up in Africa, they show up in Kenya, and the people in Kenya are so warm and welcoming that they almost don't trust it or have a hard time. Or have you seen that? Or do you feel like people just kind of, once they get on the ground, everything's okay?
So I think for us, because when we craft trips for our guests, we've been in touch with them over time. We've already established a great relationship with them, and we're telling them, this is your guide, this is what's going to happen. So I think by the time they come here, there's already that level of trust which has been built up. So you don't really get, we don't, because we craft everything, we are not getting those guests who are like distrusting of things.
Okay.
But I can understand. And unfortunately, Jason, and I know it happens everywhere, like when people want to organize things by themselves, because that's their style of doing things. Sometimes that's where then the issues can happen, because then, they've organized it all themselves. They've gone with people who they don't really know or built a relationship with or understood how people operate. And those people may then have those negative experiences, if that makes sense. That's why I think when you're booking like trips, like especially safaris and stuff, it's really important to go with like an operator who is registered with the regulatory authorities, as part of like a tour operator society or something, that just need to make sure that the credentials are in place, because you can end up trusting, and the person on the other side ends up not breaking your trust. But we don't see it.
I'm curious, is the word scam rolling around in your head? Is that, yeah, because I feel like that's kind of what you're touching on when we mentioned the word trust. And maybe somebody that thinks, I'm going to just book a ticket to Nairobi, and then when I get there, I'm going to find a bus, or I'm going to figure out some way to get out to the park, and then I'll find somebody who's got a van that will drive me around in the park, and maybe things don't work out the way they planned. Is that kind of where you're going with that?
Okay. Yes, unfortunately, that does happen. And that's why we say that when you are organizing it, it's better to, not better, I think it's essential to go with a operator who is regulated, who is, legit per se. And how do you know that?
Right. If there was a
it's
website...
also about...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's also about asking, when you are speaking to the operator, it's also about asking them the questions that, or getting personal recommendations. So our business, the way our business has grown is through personal recommendations. We don't really go out there super advertising or anything. And because it's grown through personal recommendations, where someone has traveled with us and had a great time, and everything has just, they've had like a trip of a lifetime or better, they refer someone else to us, and it just snowballs from there, because they know we can be trusted. So that's the important part. In Kenya at the moment, I don't know if there's a particular website where you can double check which travel or operators are registered with the Tourism Regulatory Authority, but there is a Tourism Regulatory Authority, so you can email them or ask them, is this a legit tour operator?
Right. And then, of course, there's always, I don't know if we should say trusted platforms, but there's ways that people look for social proof through, review websites, that
yes,
type of thing. Or
exactly.
The operator's website, if the operator's
yes.
Here's the thing. Anybody can build a nice website. I know I build websites for people. Anybody can build a nice website, but just because they have a nice, it's not all about having the nice website, but it's about having some reviews, some testimonials, something to it that gives you some sense that maybe they've been around for a while at least and didn't just pop up a website last week and ready to take your money.
Yes.
But actually what I was going to ask you is if there was a website that was just like KenyaReviews.com that was just people writing reviews about their time in Kenya, not specific to operators or guides or anything like that. And you were to go through and read reviews from people that just reviewed their trip to Kenya. What I kind of got out of what you were saying was the people that work with reputable tour operators and arrange things ahead of time are the ones that are more likely to rate Kenya as a 4 or 5 star experience out of 5. And if you were to read a bunch of 1 or 2 star reviews, oh, Kenya was this way, Kenya was that way, we were really disappointed, the people there weren't friendly, or they were always trying to get our money, then you could almost like, oh, I know why. I know where those people came from. They're the do-it-yourselfers. I mean, I travel by myself. I do a lot of stuff by myself. But I suspect when it comes to putting together a safari, it's probably not something I would do myself.
So, yeah, I think you're right. And don't get me wrong, there are people who do it themselves, but do it in a proper way. Sometimes Jason, sometimes if it's too good to be true, it probably is. Or if the price is like really like, it's those sorts of things. That's when you're like, okay, this, like sometimes like we'll get those inquiries where someone is like, yeah, I'm getting it at half the price. And we're like, fine, go ahead. But the reason
There's a reason it's half price. Yeah.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And then suddenly they find that there was hidden costs added, or the type of vehicle they thought they were getting, it's a very different vehicle, or, there's all these other things that happen. And that's then where you're like, okay, but if you're only going on the price, then that's where the problems arise. It's more about, and I'm not saying it's not about like trying to sell people the most expensive trip. No, but it's about what is the value for the money? What is the experience I'm getting for this? What is being looked after? How is the whole thing being crafted? There's all these other things that come in. But if you're just saying, I just going to go for the price, then it's going to be a problem.
Well, I think a big part of the challenge is, like you said, this is a once in a lifetime trip for most people. And people can say that regardless of what their budget is or what their finances allow, but they don't really know what is involved. So for example, I had a hot air balloon ride business for quite a while, and most people have never been in a hot air balloon. They don't know the difference. It's on their bucket list. I want to go for a balloon ride. So they go online and they start looking at websites for balloon ride companies. And they've got one balloon ride company here that says, we'll take you in our balloon. There's a picture of a balloon, and it's $100. And then you've got another company over here that says, we'll take you in our balloon, and it's $250. And if you've never been in a balloon, you've never been around a balloon, you have no idea what that means. You just think, I just want to get above the ground. Look, I don't know what a balloon ride is. I just think I want a balloon ride. I'm not sure. And it was really, I had the company on the upper end, probably the most expensive company. And it was a real challenge to explain to people what the difference is, and in this example, it'd be the difference between being 20 people in one basket, with the pilot, or being in a basket with 4 people. Well, that still doesn't mean anything. I still don't know what that means if I've never been in a balloon. I like people. What's wrong with, I assume the basket's bigger. It's not 20 people in the same small basket. So it's just really, really hard to get your head around it. Whereas with restaurants, we kind of get it. We understand that McDonald's is going to be cheaper than, a Ruth's Chris Steakhouse or whatever. So it's easy. It's like, oh, this is something special. I'm going to go to Ruth's Chris. Or I just am hungry. I'm on the run. I can walk into McDonald's and get what I want. But it doesn't translate that well into things that they don't have any experience with. So I suspect it's the same thing with safaris, and they just have no idea. They just want to see an elephant.
Yeah.
Maybe they think they just want to see an elephant, and they're their kid to see an elephant, or they want a selfie in front of a giraffe. I don't know.
Yep. No, I agree. It is. I think a lot of people come in with this. They do come in with a checklist of wanting to see the wildlife and certain species of wildlife, like the elephants and the lions and the cats and all these things. But I think, and this is where I think, not I think, we have made it our responsibility as the operator to educate the guests. It's very important because, as I said, online you get so much information and there's so much information overload. And the number of times we get people saying, I've been researching this for 6 months and I'm so confused because it's too much.
Mm-hmm.
Number one. Number two, this is where we speak to the guests to truly understand their interests, to understand what is like, if they're traveling with small kids or if it's a multi-generational trip, you have to look at it differently because there's all these different age groups. What are their interests? And then it is our responsibility to take all that information and craft it in a way that not only do they end up seeing the wildlife, but it's a lot more than that. You see, whereas for someone who's just like, yeah, I just want to see wildlife, literally, I'll be honest, the request will come, I want a 3-day Masai Mara safari. I only want to go to Masai Mara. And you're like, okay, fine. Masai Mara is fantastic. It's great. But they'll tell you, I want a 3-day Masai Mara safari, but I don't want to see a lot of cars. And you're like, well, it's not going to work. We'll send you to other places. You see, so.
Yeah.
And sometimes they don't understand the logistics of getting there. This is the other thing, Jason, when people book DIY, like we've had people who've like, yeah, I booked my flight and I booked my hotel, but can you provide me a car just from the airstrip in the Mara to the hotel? And we're like, well, you didn't book that with the hotel. Or we've had people saying, yeah, so once I land in Mara, I can book an Uber to my lodge. And I'm like, no. So, I think people don't understand the full intricacies of it. And as I keep saying, online, as much as there's a lot of information online, it doesn't give, it's very difficult to get that. I think, especially with safaris, you need that local experience. Like for us, the properties we recommend, the locations we recommend are from personal recommendation. We go and visit all these places. We know what is there. We know what the camps are like. We know what the landscapes are like. We know what the wildlife is like over there. And the other problem that comes is a lot of people have watched Discovery and National Geographic, and they think that this 1 hour segment that they've seen is what they'll see as soon as they enter the park.
Mm-hmm.
And here you're explaining to them that that segment took like 3 to 5 years to film, So it's like, that's the other thing. We don't overpromise. And I think by not overpromising, we educate the guests in even managing expectations. I tell them you could have a 3-hour, 4-hour game drive where you maybe only see some zebras or not even that. I've been on game drives where I've only really enjoyed the landscapes, but that's the beauty of being out in the wild, educating the guests before they come. Managing the expectations is so important, and you cannot get that online.
I suspect, I'm not going to ask for, I don't want any names or any identifying stuff, but I suspect that you know of websites, just say websites. I won't say operators, just websites. I bet if you had to, if I said, show me 5 websites that are totally crazy with what they promise and their pricing and all this, that you think, oh my gosh, I can't believe these people can sleep at night because they're promising all this, they're misleading people, they're charging this price, and it's just horrible. But you have to work in the community, so you're not going to say it on a podcast. I get that. But you're set for anybody that's listening to this, I can't see your face. You're sitting there shaking your head up and down. There's a bunch of those, aren't there? But it's hard for you to say it because even if you start engaging with a client and they say, well, I'm on this website, and you're like, yeah, I know exactly which website you're on. But it's hard for you to say, Jason, close your browser, get away from that website. Those people are going to, I don't know, scam you or whatever, or you're going to have a really bad experience. And you're going to go home writing a 1-star review about Kenya in general. That's the case. So how do you do that in a tactful way? Any response?
Jason, at the end of the day, we do what we do. Like we will give the guests the information, we'll give them our, we'll speak to them, we'll say, look, this is what we recommend. At the end of the day, the choice is theirs. I cannot change that. And it's just something that we accept. And if and we do get this. We do get the people who are like, I'm getting and this is the one that is always interesting. When they'll come back, they'll have asked us for 5 or 10 different variations on the itinerary. And then they'll come back and saying, oh, I'm getting a very similar itinerary for half the price. At the back end, we know that we know what our level of guides are, the quality of our vehicles, and when people say similar, even different accommodation prices can vary a lot, and there's reasons why. So you might think, oh, I'm staying at this place, it's very similar to the one you suggested, but it's not, because there is reasons why.
It's the difference between a hot air balloon with 20 people in it and
Yeah.
your fiance.
And not only that, Jason, like, I'll go back to the hot air balloon. It's the difference between the safety standards. It's the difference between the hygiene standards. Like sometimes when things are cheaper, where are the shortcuts being taken? Are the shortcuts being taken in how they pay their staff? Are the shortcuts being taken in how they treat their staff? Because those things do, unfortunately, it's business, it exists. And one of our values, I would say, as Kampur Travel Diaries, one of our biggest values is that the accommodations, the suppliers, everything that we work with, we need to know that the staff are being paid well, the staff are being looked after. All of that is important because it's a whole value chain. Everyone, only when people see how this is benefiting them and that it is benefiting them, will they want to be in that industry. And we are very particular in the suppliers we will work with. Again, I will not name names, but there are places we've gone to where I refuse to send guests because I've had the staff come and complain to me, and genuine complaints.
That's a bad
I've
sign.
seen it.
That's a really bad sign. I think when you've got when you've got a staff that's excited to be there and is proud to wear their uniform, like maybe even after work, they go into the village and they keep their shirt on because they're proud to be there. And you're going to have a totally different experience at that place as opposed to the guy that's like, oh my gosh, I hate this job. I wish somebody else would hire me. Get me that guy here. I'm curious, because you've mentioned quite a few times kind of when we speak with the guests and this and that, I'm curious, do you try and do a video call early on in the process, or what do most of your interactions with clients look like? What advice would you give them?
Generally, especially for overseas guests, we will always have a call with them. So it'll either be like a video call over Zoom or something, or a WhatsApp call. Without the call, we tend to find that it ends up being so much back and forth and things get lost in translation, expectations, things like that. So one of our non-negotiables is having a call with the client because it helps them explain what they want, what they're looking for, and it helps us understand what will work for them. And we find by having the call, it just makes things easier. It doesn't still necessarily mean that booking will come through, but the likelihood is because you've established that relationship, because you have understood it, the likelihood of them booking and trusting and understanding is much higher compared to those who don't. Generally, what happens when we have the call and the booking doesn't come through is because the person was only speaking to us for a price comparison, because they've already got a quote from somewhere else and they just want to see whether that quote is a good quote or not a good quote, and they'll then they'll be like, okay, let me find out. But our way of operating and doing things is very different from your standard, bog standard. Because and I'll tell you, Jason, we've had this feedback from guests saying, you're the first people, they're like, I sent this inquiry to 10 places. You're the first people who've said, let's jump onto a call. You're the first people to actually listen to what we want. So I think that's very important. It's our way of doing the business.
I had a feeling you were going to say that. I as I started to ask the question, I recognized maybe I'm putting you on the spot when I say, do you get on video calls? Because you could have said, no, we don't generally do that. But I knew you weren't going to say that. I could just tell that when you discuss communicating with the guests and working through this stuff, really it's the best way to do it. I also recognize that some people, I'm going to say consumers, guests, whatever you want to call them, may be reluctant to get on a video call. And that's why I wanted to bring this up. If anybody that's listening to this, maybe they're reluctant to get on a video call because in the past, when they've been asked to get on a video call with somebody selling something, they felt like it was about a high pressure sales pitch. So if I'm trying to buy insurance and someone says, let's get on a sales call, I'm like, I don't know about that. That's intimidating. Or I am trying to, something else in the world, then I might be reluctant to video call. But I'll tell you, with the tourism stuff and with like the customized stuff you're doing, it's so helpful to everybody. It's not about, you mentioned that it's more likely that somebody will actually book the trip. I get that. But I bet that's not really what's beneath it, because the truth is, okay, yeah, they're more likely to book the trip. Sure, fine, whatever. But they're also, probably more importantly, they're more likely to book a trip that is well aligned with their goals, which means they're more likely to come home after the fact and write a great review and tell their friends about it, which is more important to you than just booking trips. Because you can put itineraries online with Book It Now, people will book it, but that's not the kind of business you want, is it? I mean, you want to talk to people.
So number one, you'll find our website has no itineraries. We just don't give them. We give them locations, places, experiences. And number two, it's interesting you said that, if you do this, then they go back, great reviews, referrals to friends. For me, that's secondary. The great review, referral to friend is secondary. I'm like, you are my guest, you are my VVIP. You're in front of me. You're the person who has to have a great time. Whatever comes out of that is great. But my main focus, and it's interesting, so my main focus is for you to have a fantastic time. But as a business, we also have a second super main focus, and that is that the money we're making is then going to support these projects that we have. We actually have those two arms for the business. And I'm just going to come back because I know we spoke about this at the start, but our business, the travel business, actually started so we could have revenue to fund our programs. It wasn't that we had the travel business and then we're like, oh, let's find programs to fund. The programs were first. And this actually gave us a vehicle to actually be able to fund and grow and do the programs. So, and I'm very open with our guests. I'm very open with people. And I'm like, you know what, both things are equally as important to us. It's not that one is more important. Both are equally as important to us.
Right. I love that. And anybody that's listening to this, I'm sitting here looking at you. Maybe this will end up being in a video someday. Somebody will be able to watch the video, and I can see that in your face. So that's where we're going with doing the video calls. And why I think it's so helpful is just that ability to really see. I mean, whether we should be this way or not, we tend to but we tend to either trust people or not trust people based on things that we see in their face. So that opportunity, and it's two-way, because you might get a client that is telling you, a potential client that's telling you they want one thing, they don't want to get on a video call. And you're like, well, I'm not sure I can trust that I can do the right job for you because I haven't seen your face. I need to connect with you on some level to figure out. So for example, when I say that, you can send off an email and saying, day 4, you've got 3 options. You go I don't know, look at elephants, go visit a community, or go do something else. So maybe you've given them 3 options and they're reading it in an email. They don't really know what that is. But if you're on a video call with them and you say, well, you could go look at the elephants, you could do this, you could do that. You can watch the expression on their face, especially if their family's there. You know, if their daughter is sitting right next to them, oh, elephants, you know, and it just becomes clear to you. It's like, oh, I think the elephants, let's talk more about that. You can just make so much more progress and have such a better chance of providing that experience that you want to do. So, and I suspect maybe if there's somebody that's just absolutely, I don't know I'm curious what your thoughts are. If there's somebody who's like, nope, we don't need to do a video call. I'm a busy person, which you're like, oh, well, this would be a lot quicker, but I'm a busy person. I don't have time for video call. Honestly, do you just kind of like, okay, fine. If you don't want to do a video call, you're not the right fit for us anyway. So no big deal. Probably dodged a bullet there. And did you have to learn that the hard way? The follow-up question is, did you have to learn that the hard way?
Yes, you do learn it the hard way. As the business progresses, you see what works, what doesn't. Sometimes it's difficult. You know, you'll get an email inquiry. You'll ask them 2-3 times to jump onto the call, and they don't. And we have made the decision that unless we have enough information, so sometimes we'll get enough information from the email and we'll be like, okay, look, this is what we're sending you as a proposal, and then it's up to them. But we prefer to have the call. Even if it takes more time, you know, like maybe some people don't like to have calls because it takes a lot of time out of their day. Because Jason, these calls can be long. I don't restrict the call. I don't restrict the call to say it's 10 minutes, you know, because it takes time to do this. So,
but
and
it also takes an awful lot of time either way, because just emails back and forth, and it takes a lot of time for you, honestly, and your team to put in that kind of time and effort to really help someone create a wonderful experience that their family is going to remember forever. And I'm just going to say it, and they're not interested enough or willing to jump on a video call with you. It's like, well, at some point it can't be more important to you, Purvi, than it is to them. You know, and it's like, geez, this doesn't seem really important to you. But you want me to spend the next 3 hours putting all of this together based on this, what you think maybe you want out of an email. And then I send it to you, and I don't know. You care about what you do.
I agree completely.
Right? Yeah. It's hard to say that sometimes, especially for newer operators that haven't learned it the hard way. They're just so excited to have somebody in their inbox that says, hey, can you put together a proposal for me? All right. That's cool. We discussed a lot. We could probably come back and have 10 more conversations.
Second one. Yeah.
I know we should do that. Let's plan on doing that, because I'm not even sure we touched the tip of the iceberg, but we did cover a lot. No. So I'm curious though, before we wrap this conversation up, what did I forget to ask you? What do you wish I would have asked you? Or what do you want to make sure that our listeners know about either you, the business, Africa, Kenya, or just life in general before we wrap up?
So, Jason, as you said, I think we touched the tip of the iceberg. I think for me, one is a lot to talk about, more about, you know, how, like, why you choose, like how we choose the camps we work with, the suppliers we work with, the projects that we're doing, why are we doing those? How does that fit into the whole picture for the guest experience? I think that's the biggest thing for me, because, and also just as a business, we are constantly evolving. We're constantly changing how we do things, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, trial and error. So I'm pretty sure even if we were to have another conversation in 3 months, there'd be differences in what we say and do. But the main thing for me is, you know, speaking to people to understand that, you know, how you choose the operator that you go with, and why. And why are we choosing to work with certain suppliers, certain properties, certain accommodations, why we prioritize them. And because for us, the biggest thing is that the whole trip is full circle. So, you know, we have our projects, we are doing our community work, and then the accommodations we are working with also have their projects and their community work. So the whole bigger effect on the positive impact you're leaving in the country that you're visiting is even much bigger than if you were just to book something based on price or based on a beautiful, I don't know, 23-page itinerary. I think 23 pages is too big for like a week's itinerary. And sometimes I think it's there to confuse you. So by the time you're at the end, you've forgotten what it says.
People are just, oh, it must be a lot. There's a lot of stuff there, so it must be good, which,
Yeah.
I think we both
And
know.
and that's the other thing. I think the other thing is to talk about the fact that neither me or my husband actually come from a traditional travel background. And I think because of that, we see things differently. We don't see it in a traditional way in a lot of things. So we're like, actually, let's do it our way and let's do it this way. And it works. So that would be the conversations I'd like to have.
I love that. And it's definitely one thing that I've noticed with you, because I have an opportunity to speak with a lot of tour operators, all wonderful, doing their own things in their own ways. And obviously there's crossover. But you're right. It's not that common to come across somebody that's kind of starts with, what do we want to do for the community? What are our projects? What are our passions? And how do we leverage these resources with tourism, bringing people in from outside to help them experience it and contribute and all that. That is pretty cool, because a lot of tour operators honestly kind of start because they're excited about tourism and travel and ooh, I can make a little bit of money doing this. And then as time progresses, they realize that everybody else's website has something on there about how they give back to the community. So I guess we better do the same. Their marketing person is like, hey, you guys need to find a charity to contribute so we can put their logo on your website. So, so we can talk about how this is a green company and conservation focused or sustainable and all that. And I'm not calling out any names or anything specific, but as someone that's worked in this business for a while and has been around, there is difference.
Yes.
I've met a handful of operators that are really, really, really serious about the community.
Yes.
And they just operate differently, and their guests have a much better experience, which is what's so cool about it. Because it's just, when you do anything, if you cook from a place of love and contribution, then the food is better. So it's kind of the same thing with what you're doing. Very, very cool. I'm excited to, let's make a point to come back and have some more conversations. We're going to have a link right to your website in the show notes. So anybody that's listening that feels that connection, if they're thinking about going to Africa, I would say, you don't need to fill 10 forms out and wait for Purvi to respond and say, hey, let's jump on a video call. Let's just go over, reach out to her, set up a video call, and whether it's the right fit or not, I'll let the two of you decide. But I suspect that they'll know a lot more and be a lot more realistic about their expectations after spending some time with you on a call. So thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome. Jason, I want to add just one last thing. So
please
sometimes what has happened is the guest has gone through the process. The guest has ended up not booking with us. They've gone with someone else. And then the next thing we find 3 months or 6 months later, they've referred someone else to us. And we're like, so the calls are important.
I'm not surprised. And because it makes sense, because probably anybody that's been on this earth more than a few days has had experiences where they made the wrong choice. They knew what the right choice was, or they had the right choice was in front of them, but they made a different choice. And then when they made that different choice, someone else comes along and says, hey, I'm getting ready to do that. What would you do? Well, don't make the mistake I made. Get on a call with Purvi. So very cool. I appreciate you sharing that. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you for your time. And I've enjoyed the conversation.
Appreciate you.
I look forward to listening to all of it.
It was a fun conversation to have, and I trust that anybody listens to it will enjoy it just as much as we enjoyed it creating it. So thanks, Purvi. We'll chat with you soon. Bye-bye.
I trust you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed recording it. If you're enjoying the Big World Made Small podcast, please take a moment to tell the algorithm by subscribing and posting a review so that others can benefit as well. I also invite you to take a quick trip over to bigworldmadesmall.com and join our private adventure travel community to receive new episode notifications, special access to our guest experts, and perhaps even some exclusive partner offers that we haven't discussed on the podcast. I'll publish another episode soon. Until then, keep exploring. It's the best way to make a big world feel just a bit smaller.